Hey, everybody. Welcome to Market Mavericks. I'm joined by Mike and Scott. How are you guys doing today?
Hello.
Great.
Hey, so we've got a lot to discuss since last week. We've had an inauguration. We've had a Trump coin. We've had a Melania coin. I think there's even a Barron coin at this point. But ultimately, we have crypto hanging on every word from Trump. We were just talking about that before we went live. We've had economic news that has been a little sparse this week overall, but the market's continuing to grind higher and really very close to all-time highs. And I guess, where do you guys think we should start? Should we start with economics, politics, not to get involved in that, but I mean, just talking about what's going on there? What do you guys think?
I think that's a good spot. I mean, it seems that today markets, both crypto and otherwise, are reacting to whatever Trump says, in his speeches. And I think that that's a pretty good prelude of what's to come. I mean, there's the S&P, right? It did make an all-time high actually today. But I think probably worth getting Mike's perspective on Trump's comments on oil, right? So it seems that he's going to put a lot of pressure on OPEC to, we'll see if it works, but to increase the supply, lower the prices on oil. And I think, also putting a lot of pressure to lower interest rates. But it seems like his strategy there, Mike, is push the price of oil down, cool inflation, then the Fed can cut, and we have a liquidity palooza.
Yeah, if you could, Mike, summarize what Trump said and then kind of get into oil, I think that would be a good place to start.
Bottom line, the key thing he said was he wanted Saudi Arabia to increase production of oil, and I'm glad I published this morning. This is the Bitcoin divided by crude oil ratio. If there's anything that Trump has said he wants crypto to go higher. If there's anything that must go up, and if there's anything that must go down, is crude oil, as per his statements. And he reiterated it today. So I show the amount of WTI crude oil per one Bitcoin is around 14,000. You see the upward from the lower left to the upper right trajectory. I overlay this with the S&P 500 over GDP, and you can see we've come a long way since he was elected 8 years ago. Now it's just a question of, can this keep going up? But I would start with crude oil. Key thing is, I think he's spot on with crude oil, partly because the level, it just reached a key level. I looked at Brent, just reached around 82. WTI got around 80. And this is a key thing, is I'm bearish crude oil at these levels. If I was a trader, I'd probably be short, which means if I was, I'd get stopped out and then it'd go down. But that's the reason I'm not a trader anymore. But anybody who trades can get that, complete respect for people who still do it. I just say it. But this is my chart. The key thing that's happened is managed money net positions, i.e. futures traders, got way long. Remember, they got way short last year during the low. They helped with the low end, but now they're long again. It's the time of year to put on new positions. That's at the same time the 30-year reached around 5%. So this is a good level. This fits right into his narrative. Crude oil going down has a lot of room to go down. The average cost of production in this country is 56, and it's right around 75. So it can drop $20 to really shut off, to disincentivize that supply. But it's not just crude oil, it's everything. I published on, Wednesday, that commodity traders were double dog daring Trump by getting long. What's the time of year they get long? They did in copper. Copper, it wasn't, the managed money positions didn't get too long, but copper bumped against 450. It should go lower. And I have to rope this in because it's not just crude oil. It's all commodities. Corn bumped around 5, and managed money hedge funds are way long. They're the longest they've been in 3 years. So I'll tilt back this older chart. From a commodity standpoint, commodity traders, it's a time of year you put on new positions. They're all getting really long at the wrong levels, at good resistance for the wrong reasons, in my view. Because I think you don't want to push against Trump. He wants crude oil prices. He'll get that. And the number one pressure factor still remains China in decline. And he hasn't even talked about those tariffs yet, which are coming, unless he's going to be a big old weenie and a blowhard, which I doubt. He said he will. And you're also betting, you need to bet that the stock market's going to go up. And what's the key leading in for the stock market now is Bitcoin. You need to keep creating that wealth creation. Otherwise, all this stuff's going to tilt lower in a normal little reversion. And this is where I show you right here is I think that, that 5% move in the long run, that might have been it, particularly if I'm right about crude oil and Trump gets his way.
So in regards to oil, we've seen it come in quite substantially. I think it's down 6 straight days now, and it's getting close to, on a technical basis, a little bit of support. In fact, let's just look at the technicals on the chart here. Let me share my screen. But I agree with you. I think, again, the picture here, and you can see this nice little pop up and then what it's done since then. But I have this downsloping line right around 74, which for me, at least, it's going to be a level where I'm actually short crude in the money, and I'm going to look to take half off there just to protect, right? And again, that's a strategy that has served me well. Instead of swinging for the fences, I like to say I hit singles and doubles. And, can get to the Hall of Fame like Wade Boggs, and that's my goal right there. But ultimately, crude coming down. I did want to bring up one other aspect that I saw today. There was a headline that hit my phone, and I looked at it, and it said, in Davos, Trump says that he is going to demand that the Federal Reserve cut interest rates immediately. And here we go again in terms of last time. So to me, it's the concern of, okay, well, if we see interest rates drop, what does that do to inflation, right? So interest rates should be balanced to keep inflation low. Can he fire Powell? Supposedly not, but then again, who knows? Yeah, like what are your thoughts on that? Those comments.
I mean, Powell pushed back against him last administration,
no, you can't,
right? So I think that's bluster, but I think that this crude oil he's trying to force the hand, right? I mean, or at least he's trying to say that he's going to handle inflation and give the Fed the cover to cut, in my opinion. But I don't think that the Fed's going to cut next week, personally. I haven't even seen what the predictions are, but and then interestingly, you have Japan raising probably tomorrow, right, by 0.25. Right. So you've kind of got these conflicting winds. It's just getting very, very interesting. Do you know, Mike, what's the odds of a cut next week in the United States?
It's effectively zero, but I think this is a great transition. Is interest rates are so important because he knows, everybody knows, they might not say the number one way, most significant 10 on 1 to 10 scale to get U.S. interest rates lower is for risk assets to go down, starting with the stock market. And the leading indicator for that is Bitcoin. And that's why I like to point out, as anybody who thought inflation was going to go down a lot last year with the stock market, I'm going to show you a chart in a little bit, adding $12 trillion to market cap, which is only 40% of GDP. It's just a shocker. So that's the point, is we're creating so much wealth through risk assets, cryptos, and the stock market. It's bad. It's keeping inflation bid, keeping animal spirits going, and it's virtually impossible for inflation to go down in that environment until it does. It's not an if, it's when. So that's why I want to show you this chart. Is the key thing is I want to point out is if you look at this little red line here, is I'm showing you upward trends that are not going to last. And the one thing is I'm showing gold, Bitcoin, and this is the U.S. 10-year note treasury yield versus the top 5 countries in the world by GDP. That's China, Japan, Germany, UK, and India. We're 130 basis points above the rest of the world. So when people say U.S., there's no bond vigilantes and U.S. rates are going up, I'm like, did you see the rest of the world? This is the most ever in our database since 2006. So we got a lot of room to just revert lower. Remember back to my U.S. bond mantra, it hasn't been working, but I think the key trigger for that is we got to keep, for these U.S. rates to stay elevated versus the world, Bitcoin basically has to stay high because it's much more highly correlated to the stock market. So the way I say it, Bitcoin has to stay above 100 grand. When, or if it does drop below 100 grand, everything tilts lower. That's potentially the stock market, potentially risk assets, potentially inflation, because it's such a leading indicator, unless that's changed. But the key thing is, what does that do for gold? And that's why I stick with, on a 1-year basis to today, gold is up 35%. And the S&P 5 total returns about 27%. So gold's starting to break out versus that. The rock is beating stocks. That is not good, particularly in an environment where we have a record-setting stock market, massive competition from Bitcoin, and we haven't had inflows in gold ETFs for 4 years. And so then, to me, that's indication that gold's ready it's showing us that something's wrong. And maybe it's getting too hot. But that's the key thing I want to tilt over is we still have the deepest pockets on the planet buying gold, and that's why I'm sticking with the rock. And I'm really worried it's telling us that, oh, maybe we'll just get that first 10% correction in the stock market, and that'll be the time to really reassess adding to risk assets versus an environment like this when you have things breaking out and extreme optimism. It's when you're supposed to be saying, yeah, probably not a good idea to join that party.
So one thing I just want to bring up is we obviously have the 10-year yield, which is currently trading at 4.64%. And this is in spite of the Fed lowering rates by, 100 basis points in September. And so when Trump says, I'm going to force them to lower rates, can he really, to me, it almost seems like the market controls interest rates more than anyone. Like even Jerome Powell, is it a fallacy that we believe that the Fed really controls interest rates?
Well, short rates, absolutely. They do control short rates, and the Fed can and has in the past bought plenty of long bonds when I think it's time to monetize the debt a little bit in QE. They can do that. But this is typical Trump bravado, and he has to have to fire a Federal Reserve Reserve Chairman, you have to have cause. And, and the guy can really, skirt the law a lot, but that would be quite significant. And I guarantee all his advisors and have told him it's probably not a good idea.
So, Scott, I have this chart
discombobulate the financial system.
I have this chart up, Scott. This is the M1 money supply. And both Mike and I, we've talked about how we've been somewhat surprised that the stock market and really risk assets, including, the fart coins and the rest of these, just keep on getting billions of dollars of inflows. But then you look at M1 money supply and you see that even from 2009 to 2020, the incline started to get steeper, right? But look at the amount of money that was essentially created from 2020 COVID to here, and look at how little it's pulled back. And I think, and again, Mike, you could probably talk about this, maybe Scott, more than I can. But to me, when I look at this, it tells me there is just so much liquidity in the system still. Like it hasn't even 20% hasn't been sucked out from what they added during COVID, right?
Yeah.
Scott, you want to go for that one?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I think that that shows that M1 is dropping, but M2 is going up. Right. So it also kind of depends on where the money is in the system and where they're finding this liquidity. Also, I think it's important to note, as we were talking about Powell and the Fed, I think we're in a very fiscal driven environment, and that frankly, the Fed just doesn't really matter that much. Right. I think it makes great headlines. Everybody hangs on every word that Jerome Powell says, but I just don't think it matters. And I think, as you said, the market is proving that. But I think that sort of the Fed's lack of impact is being exposed at this point. Right.
Yeah. The fact that they cut rates 100 basis points and long bond yields went up over 100 basis points, that's a bad sign. That's the market telling them, you shouldn't be cutting rates. You're creating inflation. There's too much risk in the system, too much liquidity in the system. It's the wrong thing to do. It's just, I've never really seen it. And it's such a bad indication. That's where, McGlone is still talking about McGlone, but I still have gold beaten most risk assets. And to me, that's the key thing to remember is, as Lynn Alden says, we have complete fiscal dominance. 7% of GDP we're spending every year in terms of our deficit spending. That is a massive pump. Let's compare that to Germany. Germany's basically GDP is flat for 2 years, but they're not deficit spending. Which one's worse? I don't know. At least we're the engine of economic growth. The point is, we've lifted. That's helped force risk assets to such high levels, according to my colleague Gina Martin Adams, some very expensive levels. Too much. There's so much optimism for earnings next year that the risk is normalization. So that's my prediction. We're going to get at least a 10% correction, S&P 500. God help us, that used to be normal. And that'll be your chance to at least reassess what to do. But the bottom line is, with cryptos in the lead and with this massive speculation in 2.4 million wannabes, and we saw this weekend with the crypto, the Trump coin, the Milana coin, is how you can create money out of nothing with unlimited supply, ease of entry and access. That's not going to end well in terms of Shiba Inu with billions of dollars of market cap. But these are indications that we've seen in all the big peaks in history. And the question is how long it can last. In the meantime, it's a great party.
By the way, Bitcoin just flew. When I turned this on, we were like 103, and it just
105 now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
106
nice
there in
pop.
30 minutes. I'm imagining that Trump just said something.
That's
my guess. If you look at this chart, by the way, so this is I went to a 30-minute just so I could show it, but you had obviously price kind of declining into this morning. Cynthia Lummis tweeted that big news was coming, and the B was a Bitcoin symbol. I don't know if you guys saw that. She said, watch for 10 a.m., like as if this is like a WWE or something. And so everybody said reserve, right? So we're getting a strategic reserve executive order. She would never be so irresponsible as to like tweet a Bitcoin logo with huge news coming if it was small news. Well, it was small news. It was that she was the head of the digital asset subcommittee of the Senate Finance Committee, which, by the way, is actually big news because she is the one proposing the strategic Bitcoin reserve. She will be the one who sets the priority of the bill. She will be the one whipping votes. It is big news, but like it was not big in the way that it was promoted. And you can see it literally, like we got up to like 106 on her announcement. 107 almost, and immediate in 30 minutes back down to 104. Then Trump started speaking and said that the United States would be the AI and crypto capital of the world, right back up to 106. But this is one of those things where it was literally like Bitcoin was 100% trading on Lummis and Trump's word. So I'm imagining Trump just said something because I don't know, but 2:30 p.m. he was having a call with Nayib Bukele, and there was conjecture there'd be more executive orders dropping. Who knows? we'll see what we can find.
Wild
But,
stuff. So speaking of Bitcoin, Scott, so the crypto community has expected major things. Are they still okay? Are they somewhat like waiting, like, why haven't we gotten more out of it? I mean, what's your take on that?
Oh, here you go. First of all, let me just bring this up. Here's the news. I can tell you exactly. We knew exactly what it was going to be. Trump signing order related to crypto, RTRS. So I don't know what it is. We had conjecture that it would be saying the crypto's national priority would be one. One would be the overturn of SAB 121, which basically would allow big banks to custody crypto. The other could be a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So I guess we're going to see what this is. So that's what's happening. Sorry, I kind of missed the core of your question because I was looking up that news.
No worries. No worries. I was just wondering if, I mean, and it sounds like it's ever moving at this point, but the crypto community obviously has expected a ton from Trump. Have they gotten it? Are they still, they're still,
they haven't gotten it, but it's been 3 days, right? And so like anyone who thought that Trump's #1 priority coming into office was going to be to scream about Bitcoin in his inaugural address, or to like, sign Bitcoin reform or a bill before immigration reform, was just living in our own little self-entitled echo chamber. This is not the #1 priority. The fact that he even made a comment about it at WEF, I think, is big. The fact that he freed Ross Ulbricht, even though it's not really a statement about Bitcoin or the market, that was a #1 promise to Bitcoiners who are very passionate about it. David Bailey was on Space this morning, the CEO of Bitcoin Magazine, who obviously brought Trump to Nashville. And he said he immediately got a message from the Trump team that said, promise made, promise kept, when Ross was released. So you can see that they are trying to at least assuage like the donors and the crypto community that helped so much to get him elected. And if we're going to get an order right now, I think it's big. But then, like, on the flip side, you have the Trump token, which is the most gratuitous grifting cash grab of all time, and kind of is just like laughing in the face of Bitcoiners, true Bitcoiner maxis and stuff. So it's going to be very interesting. But listen, it doesn't really matter if he does it today or tomorrow or next week, right? Maybe the first 100 days, if we don't hear the words crypto, I would be pretty disappointed.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at charts here, and I see, so Bitcoin popped up. The S&P also popped up here. So you see that risk on kind of vibe in the markets. When Bitcoin goes, risk on comes into the stock market. And then the dollar is down ticking a little bit as well, which the markets react to positively for a weaker dollar. So, it's just interesting to watch all these things working together. But yeah, I think overall, the big question for me is if we got a Bitcoin reserve.
All the way back down, by the way.
Yeah,
this is on Coinbase.
Wow.
Look at this volatility today.
So think about the significance of announcing the U.S. would start allocating to a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Would that make sense, first of all, to use deficit spending for this highly speculative digital asset? A lot of professionals say no, and even Mike Novogratz and people like Nick Carter and that say that's kind of silly. But would you do that before you accumulated it? No, and even if you are accumulated, but
Michael Saylor does that. He said he's in a deal.
I will tell you this, though, that David Bailey, when I asked him that today, Mike, just before you make your point, and he said he thinks 90% chance of strategic Bitcoin reserve based on the conversations he's having, sub 25% chance that it includes the United States buying any Bitcoin.
So that would just pump it up to make his constituents happy.
Right. So they keep what they have. It potentially forces other central banks and governments, obviously, to buy more Bitcoin, but that it would be out of our expectation right now for them to divert budget to actually buy it or print money to buy it, which would be the ultimate irony.
The key problem question I have is, I'm long-term Bitcoin bull. I just think it's so silly. It reminds me of the peak part of that in 2017. Is now that we've reached this threshold and the whole space is, just massive speculative excesses and prices have gone up, and, you have Dogecoin worth $51 billion and things like that. What happens if we do that? And who cares about the rest of them? I mean, I see everything lately about Ethereum and Solana and XRP. I mean, okay, so if it's just Bitcoin, how about the rest?
Yeah, right. Apparently it was Trump signs order to create cryptocurrency working group. We'll see what that means. We know that we just got a digital asset committee. The SEC has created a group under Hester Peirce. Seems bullish, but that's not going to be the thing that's going to send price.
Right. Yeah. And just going back to the Bitcoin reserve, I'm in that same camp where, to me, one of the big comments from Trump a month ago or so after he was elected was threatening the BRICS countries, which with having an alternative to the dollar, it doesn't make sense to me to then be like, oh, but we're going to have a alternative to the dollar. Like you're just sending the signal that everyone has to have an alternative to the dollar, and then the dollar weakens. So yeah, I'm with you. I think they might say, hey, we're holding X amount of Bitcoin already because we seized it from all these places. We're going to keep that. But like you said, I doubt they would go as far as to even say it's a reserve. Like I almost feel like even just saying you have a reserve is a detriment to the US dollar.
It's also going to send,
just love
like,
that
if they're not buying it, it's going to send the price way up with other people buying it, and then they'll be priced out of. Yeah, it's a lot of game theory there.
Yeah,
I just love that word alternative to dollar that Trump started in first administration. He was completely wrong. I'm glad he flipped. Give him credit for that. The number one traded crypto is still the dollar, Tether, and it's the best. People look at CBDCs. Well, U.S. doesn't have to do it because we already have all these crypto dollars that track the dollar. I mean, it's just how wonderful this space is. The technology is overwhelming. That tokenization is going to treasuries. It's probably going to go to everything. The technology is great. It's just a question of have a lot of these other 2.4 million crypto assets just kind of appreciated too much. And that's what I point out is, yeah, they're probably too expensive at these levels. Not that they can't get more expensive, but we still haven't had that good test. We have a record-setting S&P 500 made a new record yesterday. Haven't had a 10% correction in almost 2 years. Everything's going in this together. What it's doing is keeping inflation bid. What's it doing is taking away one of those key things that have got crypto's bid in the past, and that's the Fed easing. It's keeping the Fed tightening now. They kind of have to because it's keeping inflation bid. It's keeping animal spirits bid, and it's just creating too much wealth, which is great, but that's not a good way to bring down inflation, which is a goal of the Trump administration.
That's right. Especially if you want interest rates to go down, you either have to tank the economy or somehow. And they actually go hand in hand, right? I mean, the whole idea of bringing down inflation, you got to slow people's ability to keep buying stuff.
Well, one good way is just
that oil can do it, though, right, Mike? He just seems to think if you can get oil low enough,
that'll help. Absolutely. There's always been a very high correlation between oil and interest rates, but typically when oil goes down, it usually means there's not that demand pull. Oh, the world's changed now. My EV is 11 years old, so we don't have that demand pull anymore for oil, and it's actually declining in China. The rest of the world, as I pointed in the other chart, with much lower yields than the rest of the world, is hilting towards a recession. But the bottom line is that I think one key thing is maybe just have a year we're not making record highs by 20% in the stock market. Just stabilize for a little while. It's just creating so much of that wealth that just keeps animal spirits, just keep people feeling wealthy and keeps inflation bid.
Yeah. All right. So looking towards next week, we kind of touched on it that the markets are not pricing in any rate hikes or cuts, obviously cuts being the more one the market wants. But do you guys expect Powell to be pretty hawkish and try to bring the stock market down? I thought one of the keys that shocked me recently was the last time they announced, the cut. I think it was the final cut that they did. He actually brought up this S&P and basically said it's gone up and this is causing an issue for inflation. And does he try to tank the S&P again like they did last time?
I'm glad he finally said that, because it's things that I had another conversation with an old trader friend of mine that for decades ago, we used to trade interest rates together. We all thought it was just silly that they thought the only thing that mattered was to increase in unemployment when they cut rates. And the market told them not to, and they still did it. And what happened? Yields went up. So I'm glad he said that. But the one thing, that lesson that Greenspan taught us with irrational exuberance is Fed chairmen have learned a lesson of trying to push the stock market or even talk it down a little bit. It's not a good idea. And if you really want to piss off Trump, he would do that. So I don't think he will, but he needs to point out the facts of what's really boosting inflation. It's what people like me say is massive wealth creation in the stock market. Like I said, $12 trillion, 40% of GDP. That's the most ever. And it's silly to expect inflation to decline and consumer spending decline to go down in that environment. It's just, okay, well, forget all the rules about supply, demand, and economics. And so he might have to point that out, but I think it's nice that they're finally tilting that way. It only took a while for to Trump to tilt on cryptos, and he did finally.
So, and I agree with that. And then Scott, just kicking it over to you, I just happened to be thinking, I was just watching Bitcoin try to push up. You can see it on your screen.
The 1 minute chart. Yeah, I was just bringing up the 1 minute chart to show that in a matter of 2 minutes.
I love the 1 minute chart.
We're at 103 and 106 in the same 2.5 minutes. Yeah.
But in terms of alts, So Trump's been elected. Are we still expecting an altcoin season, or has it happened already, or kind of what's the thought process there?
I think it's happening in the meme coin space to some degree, and I think that it happened in the AI space for a little while. But I think that we have not, by any stretch, had a wholesale alt season. I mean, how would we define that, right? Bitcoin dominance. I mean, Bitcoin dominance is breaking up, right? It's making kind of new highs for 2025. Even when Trump coin was launched and, was at a 70 billion market cap, we saw the total market cap of crypto dropping. So what does that tell you? It tells you that Trump was really exciting, but not if you were holding any other altcoin that people were dumping off to be FOMO ridiculous and get into Trump, right? So it was the same old washing machine of liquidity. There was no real new money. This was, people, if you look at the way the price action of Trump was happening, it was $1 and $2 million positions, right? This wasn't grandma and grandpa jumping in because they wanted to support the new Donald Trump collectible as it was marketed. So right now, I think the focus is still on one side of being complete casino degeneracy. It's the barbell, and Bitcoin on the other side. This morning, I called it Bitcoin and bullshit barbell. And nothing in the middle really moving very much, right?
Well,
and I think that that's the case. So I don't think we've had the real alt movement yet. But it's going to take a lot of retail to come in for that to happen. I think that will happen, but it's not going to happen because people are buying ETFs. That money doesn't trickle down.
So can I follow up on that a little bit, Gareth? I saw you're brewing on something, but I want to, my key takeaway from our last 25 minutes or so of speaking, and everything we've spoken about in the last few months now, is there is nothing more. I'm just, let's say, interest rates potential. They're not going to ease. There is nothing. Remember a couple of years ago, and sometimes on our show, we talk about Bitcoin being leading indicator and got a little pushback. Now it's by far the most significant leading indicator, 24/7 traded on the planet. So look at the hypotheticals. If Bitcoin drops below 100,000, that means everything, potentially stock market, is at risk, even bond yields, of going down. Consumer spending, everything. It means Trump's promises might be failing. At some point, that's the key thing we have to point out is every single time you have this kind of new administration and massive optimism, it always seesaws. No, we haven't had that yet. We haven't got close yet. At some point, we will. So that's my point is, I can't analyze copper or gold or even the stock market or crude oil anymore without mentioning Bitcoin, because it's all that matters. It has to go up if you expect any type of buoyancy in other risk assets.
It just happened, by the way. He announced a digital asset stockpile. Apparently, this is being reported. President Trump signs crypto executive order to create a national digital asset stockpile. Bitcoin maximalists must be, if that's the actual wording, they must be taking their swords, Japanese style, harikari, whatever, and just, if he really said digital asset instead of Bitcoin, they're going to die.
No, Trump
Can
coin.
you imagine if it's like a Trump meme coin stockpile?
But also look at the term, right? Stockpile versus reserve.
Right.
That's really key. That is super, super important. Because again, that doesn't mean it's in competition with the dollar. It's just a stockpile.
Crazy though, but that's it.
Okay.
I mean, there's the crypto executive order. I mean, I can't even imagine the mental gymnastics that are happening right now on Twitter.
I got to look at the S&P here too. S&P, I mean, it's been floating up on like volume. It's not doing much.
I mean, S&P is just kind of like floating into a new high, and Bitcoin is all over the place. So this is clearly whatever's happening on this chart that we're watching is happening just because of these announcements. And listen, Bitcoin is a nascent asset, it's still a small market. When you have the president of the United States, waffling back and forth with anticipation of what he's going to say, you're going to see price movement.
Yep.
This market's been holding its breath completely to see what Trump does. I tweeted this the other day on Saturday or something after the launch. I said, Donald Trump controls the crypto market now. And he does. For better or for worse, he controls it. After what we saw with that meme coin, he can change everything with a tweet.
Do you guys and Scott, you probably have a better sense of the crypto community out there. Do you think people were generally excited by the Trump coin, or was there a sigh or a gasp of like, oh my God, I can't believe he's doing this to enrich himself? Or were they like, yeah, this is the greatest thing for crypto? Because I could see it both ways, but then I think the Melania coin really kind of made it more about just getting rich versus.
That's the answer. So largely it was already disbelief and a gasp to start, and Melania put it over to the edge, which apparently was a different team that did it. It was kind of a cash grab, but the first one was a cash grab as well. I think nobody really wanted to see that. There are people excited about trading it, But yeah, I mean, it's poor optics. Listen, my first gut instinct when I saw it, immediately I tweeted, good for crypto, bad for humanity. And that's still kind of my gut, right? You get more people paying attention. Crypto's in the main stage. Like, it's telling you exactly how he's going to approach this industry for 4 years, which is governor off, have fun, do whatever you want. I feel like, depending on the SEC, but like the president printing $60 billion of wealth out of thin air with a tweet is not anything anyone wants to see.
True enough. All right. On that note, let's leave it for this week. Wonderful to see you, gentlemen. Follow them below on their handles, folks, and we will see you next week. Have a good one. Take care.